Hello again. 35 years ago, Britain was a high trust society. That is to say, a society where we tended to trust other people, even complete strangers, and we all shared common ethical values. Everybody worked to the same moral code. There were criminals, there were con artists, but they tended to be very much the exception. If somebody said his name was Jim Smith, you assumed that he was telling the truth, and you didn't feel the need to ask for documents to verify his identity. I've said before on this channel that when I first opened a bank account many years ago, I didn't even need to show any identification. The bank manager simply took my word for my name and address. It was as simple as that. I went to the bank, I told him where I was working, he wanted my name and address, no documents, and that same day had a bank account. How times have changed. We can pinpoint pretty well when this all began to change, and also why. Here's an example of something from the high trust society which was Britain. This is British visitor's passport, and one could obtain it at the local post office. No hanging around, just produce a photograph and some identification, like a driver's license, and this passport would be issued in a matter of minutes. It could be used all over Europe and even further afield in Bermuda and Tunisia. Incredibly, you could also put as many children as you like on it. There's a space here for children, you will observe. You just wrote their names down. You could put a dozen children on it if you wanted. And that was all there was to it. No photographs of them, just giving their names and dates of birth. Imagine that, being able to go to the post office and just by showing your driving license and a gas bill, you could get a passport, British passport. This one was issued in 1991. Now, by having chance, I have here a document from the same year, which shows why this kind of easygoing approach to identity began to be impossible to maintain, and why rules about passport, bank accounts, and so on were tightened up to the extent that you now need a British passport to rent a room or get a job, something which in 1991 would have been beyond belief. This is a report by a special tenancy audit team who were operating in the London Borough of Hackney in 1991, at the same time that this passport was issued. At that time, the internal telephone directory for council staff in Hackney would have shown you that almost every single person working in housing was Nigerian. Specifically, they were Yoruba. They somehow gravitated towards the housing department and later towards the grant people in charge of grants and so on. The Yoruba operated housing in Hackney as their own personal money-making scheme, and the number of rackets going on was almost beyond belief. It got to the point where staff would mark a flat down as being void or uninhabitable, so on paper no one was living there, and then they would advertise this place for rent in a newspaper in Lagos. This is no exaggeration, by the way. This actually happened. It got to be such a scandal that the council put together a tenancy audit team in 1991 to visit every council flat and see who was actually living in them. This is a page from the report on just two properties. We read out a few highlights. 34 Queen Elizabeth Close. Property occupied by a lady who said she was not the tenant but the tenant's sister. When she was asked what she was doing in the property, she replied she was looking after it for her sister Julie. The property was supposed to be rented by a Miss Julia Shoddy and her son. When asked to produce ID, she said it was at her other property, her other address at 42 Granard House on the Gascoigne estate. There was no evidence of a child living in the property, and officers present did not believe her story. She was arrested for being a missing overstayer. It was subsequently discovered she was in fact Julia Shoddy and had provided a false birth certificate to Hackney for the child she said she had to obtain accommodation for. The child did not exist. Then it goes on to cover the other address at 42 Granard House, Gascoigne Estate, E9. The tenancy was granted to Mr. and Mrs. Enitan Sobowale and son. Property occupied by Mrs. Sobowale, only no evidence of child. When asked where her child was, she said he had been abducted by her husband. Although she had no idea where the child was and it had been over a year, she was still claiming income support and child benefit for the child. She turned out to be another member of Miss O'Shodey's family. She was asked to provide a birth certificate for the child and her passport, which she could not do. She was asked to come to the tenancy audit office the following day with the documents. She did turn up, but the passport showed she was in the UK all through 1989, where she states she had the child in Lagos in the same year. Mrs. Sobowale had previously provided Hackney with the false birth certificate for the child to obtain the accommodation in the first instance. That was the sort of thing going on, not only Hackney, London Borough of Southwark. Again, the internal telephone directory at that time was full of Yoruba names. There was also a big racket going on there. Right here is when our high trust society began to slip away from us. If you wonder about all the difficulties now in opening a bank account because of laws on money laundering, or why you need a passport to rent a flat, then look no further. Once large numbers of people from low trust societies in West Africa or South Asia came to this country and saw just how lax our procedures were when renting property or opening bank accounts, they saw opportunities. This has affected every single aspect of life in Britain, not just for immigrants and foreigners, but for British people too. It means nobody ever trusts anybody. Everything has to be verified. Any claim to be a certain person must be verified with passports, driving licenses, and so on. Nobody trusts anybody to tell the truth about financial matters or housing, and it's all caused by one thing: immigration.